arguably, the essence or foundation of Buddhist teachings is found in the Four Noble Truths, because all the other teachings, you could see them as sort of like sub-instructions or subcategories. Not that they are minor or inferior, but that these are just specific instructions or elaborations on how to live in accordance with these truths, the Four Noble Truths. And as a collection, they can be understood as the comprehensive framework for addressing the fundamental issue of life, which is suffering, and revealing the path to liberation from it, with each sutta or list of precepts serving as a formula for these truths, these very profound truths. It's worth noting, however, that the Buddha typically did not begin his teachings by introducing the Four Noble Truths. In the context of Buddhism during his time, these truths were considered more advanced teachings. Though not secret or exclusive necessarily, but the Buddha imparted them to lay people as well. It's just that they were not his initial or even secondary teachings. So instead, he often started lessons with foundational concepts like generosity, which is practiced in the form of giving and service to others. Another important aspect he emphasized early on were the dangers of indulging in sense pleasures and worldly attachments as part of a regular lifestyle, which he explained was the primary cause of suffering that arises out of ignorance. For instance, in the Upali Sutta, when the Buddha was teaching a householder who was not a monk but relatively new to his teachings, he started his lesson by introducing the practice of generosity. Then he would explain virtue, or sila, and eventually emphasize the detriments of entertaining sense pleasures and mental attachments. The danger lies in our tendency to become fascinated and addicted to the allure of beautiful things, the beauty in everything, and the pleasures that are before us, and that we tend to entertain on a daily basis. Obviously in the physical world, mostly. But anywhere, really. Anywhere our mind goes, there's that risk. So this preoccupation with things that are visually beautiful or otherwise sensual, the addiction to sensation, are the main obstacles that distract us from the activities and decisions and actions that are more wise and meaningful in life. The sensual life is also a lifestyle that still causes a great deal of harm to everyone, including ourselves, even if we're not criminals. And finally, after having explained the consequences of sensual life as well as the benefits of renunciation and meditation and such, he would explain the formula of the Four Noble Truths. Now, regarding the wording of the title, the Four Noble Truths, many scholars believe that it's not an ideal translation of the Pali phrase, since they essentially explain that it's not the truths themselves that are noble, but that only people who are of noble spirit, people of virtue, who are pure and can live according to these truths are noble. And in fact, these truths are called truths because they're fundamental realities or laws of existence. So it may be better to say to translate it as the four fundamental truths of nobles, or of the noble one. That's more accurate. They're just fundamental laws, cosmic laws. Now, the Buddha's first sermon is possibly the most well-known descriptions of the Four Noble Truths. The term for sermon is somewhat misleading because it's very unlikely that the initial discourse the Buddha had with his earliest followers resembled the comprehensive sermon that we have today, just because of how much was added onto it later. But nonetheless, at its core, the first noble truth remains unchanged. The first noble truth states that the nature of existence is suffering, which for all sentient beings is inevitable. In the context of the noble truths, dukkha is the term for suffering, but it can also mean distortion or delusion. He explains that suffering occurs during birth, illness, aging, and death, as well as the experience of pleasurable sensations, the loss of pleasurable sensations, and the inability to obtain what one wants. And on top of all this, it's also taught that this suffering perpetuates with constant rebirth within the 6 realms of life, due to the 5 aggregates of clinging. So dukkha encompasses suffering in all of its different forms and severities. So scholars understand it to often mean unsatisfactoriness. And that's a very appropriate term too, because for many of us who have the luxury to watch a video presentation or listen to a lecture and just live a normal life, the kind of suffering we experience in first world countries, in other words, is primarily inconvenience and dissatisfaction. That's the majority of our suffering on a day-to-day basis, right? So dukkha includes the unsatisfactory nature of existence, which is that for no matter what kind of being you are, we are never truly satisfied with what we get, and we never truly get what we want. And of course, physically or in terms of accomplishments, we do often get the things we want, but oftentimes we realize that we made the wrong decision, or it wasn't what we expected, it wasn't as good as we expected, or it's nice for a while. This is a common one where we get what we want, we achieve something, and it's great for a while, and then we get bored. And that sense of dissatisfaction sets in again, and it persists. And we have to find the next thing, the next high, the next thrill, the next pleasure. This is noticeable as time goes by. We get that latest iPhone or DSLR camera or that car we've been saving up for. We enjoy it for a bit, but then what do you know? Another one comes out. One that's supposedly better. Or a next level Canon EOS camera comes out with 60 megapixels. So now your trusty lenses are no longer compatible with the lens mount. Or you realize that your car isn't reliable. And it's cool, but it's not a good brand. It's costing you hundreds of dollars every couple of months to maintain it ad infinitum. All of us are familiar with this feeling of constant dissatisfaction, but most of us aren't that fazed by it because we always just turn our attention to the next thing, the next indulgence, the next entertainment, before getting too uncomfortable, before really reaching a point where we feel that there's a change that really needs to happen. Now, he also adds briefly in the end that the 5 aggregates of clinging perpetuate our suffering. The 5 aggregates are known as the 5 skandhas in Sanskrit. In Buddhism, usually, I guess, skandhas or kleshas, samskaras. Well, the term you use depends on the school. I usually teach Theravada terms as much as I can because it's just so popular. Yep, other terms include Oh, there was another one. I don't remember. But this is a technical term that I've explained in introductory presentations. In short, these are the vast collection of mechanical aggregates or defects. In the Orients, they use the word defilements, mental defilements, that filter and condition or trap consciousness and give creatures what we know as a subconsciousness, an instinctual animal mind. And we have this too. We are creatures, we're animals, we're mammals, but any living creature, if it's not awakened, if it's not an angel or a Buddha, has this. And we have so many of these aggregates in our mind that we identify with them, and we think that it's who we are, it's part of us, it's part of our character or personality. We unknowingly define ourselves by them. So at any rate, all things within existence inevitably pass, though. And so the things we obtain are ultimately never reliable. And the problem is we don't comprehend this. We just go on to the next thing. Constantly. That's another reason why, even when we're not experiencing a lot of physical or emotional suffering, dukkha continues to pervade our lives because we are dissatisfied. At the same time, we accrue karma when we feed desire, and that's the component that makes life truly painful and turbulent and inconvenient. Now, the second noble truth states the cause of this intrinsic suffering, which is called samudaya. Samudaya means arising. So it refers to suffering that arises from a particular cause. Now, the cause of suffering is craving, or tanha in Pali. Tanha is also translated as thirst. The mental states of craving and aversion lead to suffering because they perpetuate insatiable desires and attachments to what are impermanent things. But the ultimate cause of suffering is ignorance of cyclic existence. These are really a trio: desire, ignorance, and aversion, which includes both fear and hatred. The disliking of something, not wanting something. These are the three fundamental ones. Now, various philosophies and major religions share this idea that life, in some way or another, falls short of offering complete happiness and satisfaction. It certainly isn't a concept that is exclusive to Buddhism. But what Buddhism teaches about the cause of the unsatisfactory nature of life is very specific. The Buddha explains in the first sermon that the origin of suffering and unsatisfactoriness is, quote, craving, which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is craving for sensual pleasures, craving existence, craving for extermination. So among the more obvious forms of craving, he mentions that we also crave existence, which is to say that we have the desire to stay young and live prosperously and live forever if we could, so that we can continue on just feeding this pleasurable life. And at the same time, there are also plenty of those of us who have a similar but opposite craving, where there's the desire to stop existing, to just to end it all. They've had enough, but this is the desire of this is so strong, it's an attachment to that. It's not a good, a sincere longing. It's an attachment. It's different when you have the yearning to do better, to change, and to progress, so that you can truly cease existence in the way of enlightenment. that's not attachment. If you do that right, you have longing. You see the need to change. It's different. It's not like being suicidal, right? Now, there is a very precise mechanical process in nature that is constantly working within our subconsciousness and producing consequences and dukkha, both in the mental dimension and in the physical world too. It begins with ignorance of the first noble truth and is perpetuated by our ignorance in pleasures. The stages of going from desire to desire, or from desire to satisfaction, are part of this terrific and elaborate process known as transmigration. It's the process of evolution. It's the evolution and devolution of souls in nature as they pass through the various kingdoms and phylums and genuses of nature over the course of millions of lives. Now, about recognizing the unsatisfactory nature of existence, it takes some experience and thoughtful reflection to realize that this intrinsic law is why we are constantly struggling in this state of pursuing happiness, but never sustaining it for good. Because in reality, we are constantly diverting our attention to the next stimulation, the next experience, the next Game of Thrones episode, the next paycheck, the next weekend, the next bite of food, even, something small like that, or the next career advancement, next project, and so on. So in order to maintain awareness and austerity in the first and second noble truths, we study the Dhamma, and we practice daily exercises like self-observation and retrospection, or analytical meditation, right? Insight meditation, vipassana. That's how we can keep track of what's going on in our mind and what's really grabbing our attention and keeping it there and keeping us kind of fixed and attached. The third noble truth asserts that there is a solution to end suffering, and the cessation of that suffering is called nirodha, which by itself means cessation. The more popular and familiar term is nirvana, which also means cessation, and in Theravada they say nibbana. But it tends to refer to the state of consciousness, nirodha in particular. Now, scriptures related to the third truth teach the various practical methods and steps to end suffering. It generally involves service to others and the removal of mental aggregates that produce craving and detachment. So in this truth of cessation, it states that in spite of the perpetual suffering in existence, there is a way to end it and all of its forms, including the lingering of unsatisfactoriness. And the method is precise and universal. It's not arbitrary or accidental or exclusive to certain kinds of people. So it's a solitary work as well, in that each being is fully responsible for their own spiritual growth. So it's impossible to get others to do this work for you. It takes your own will. If you get other people to do things for you, well, that's costing you the Dharma. You're not creating Dharma, they are for you. So it's costing you. And in most cases, you can't pay somebody else's karma for them. They have to figure out a way to do that for themselves. So the solution to suffering is the renunciation of desire, which in a broad sense includes aversion or fear. In the first sermon, the Buddha says that the cessation of suffering is, in his words, it is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, and non-reliance on it. So with proper practice, we must eliminate our desires and leave not even a small amount remaining. And finally, the fourth noble truth states that the method that leads to the cessation of suffering is the noble eightfold path, also known as the middle path. This is called the magga in Pali. It's an area of Buddhism that deserves its own presentation, but my lesson, Meditation and Ashtanga Yoga, provides detailed instructions on what we consider the Hindu equivalent of the Eightfold Path. The fundamental principle here is cosmic ethics. Everything we do in our daily lives should be approached with the right attitude and perspective, and some habits have to be dropped altogether. So we must study ourselves and utilize meditation regularly in order to comprehend the nature of existence and commit to an ethical lifestyle. Because with the way that we are right now, we don't have that. We've lost the teaching centuries ago. It became completely corrupt, distorted. We no longer live in a religious or spiritual culture. So we have to learn to value values, to value virtue, again, to see this as a necessary part of society, to keep ourselves functioning properly, sane, and progressing as a species. And the specific ones to work on, we can learn in meditation, and things we need to eliminate, we can learn in meditation. So when we take on this responsibility, we learn to work with the superior laws of nature so that our actions perpetuate good results and don't create karma. Rather, they create Dharma, which is the good kind of karma. It creates a good, healthy spiritual economy. It creates the spiritual currency, spiritual wealth. And now, as for the Noble Truths in general, it's safe to say that we can view these cosmic laws as practical tasks, each one requiring both some intellectual understanding as well as visceral comprehension that we get from both personal experience, just going through the events in life and the adversities and learning from them, but as well as our own efforts in reflection, contemplation, that is, in this context, meditation. Now, having said that, Buddhism does have the concept of heaven and hell, and they are taught as real, literal places that can be experienced and lived in. They are not to be mistaken for symbols or metaphors. And in fact, Buddhism contains remarkably specific elaborations of the various levels and types of heavens and hells. Some are categorized into 8 levels or 9 levels, even hundreds of levels for both polar regions. The heavens, for example, are organized into ecstatic, sensuous realms with form, and more psychologically still, refined, or neutral or equanimous places that are formless, but nonetheless delightful. Right? It begins with the 4 jhanas in meditation, which we can all experience through practice in meditation. The 4 blissful states of joy that leads to equanimity and then samadhi, and that's just the beginning. However, in spite of these places existing forever as places or dimensions, because the Buddha taught that karma, nirvana, and emptiness, which is non-existence, the sphere outside of living and alive things, karma, which includes samsara and lower dimensions, nirvana, which is heaven, and emptiness. Those are the only intrinsic things that exist forever, because they are just the framework of existence. They are not the beings themselves in that framework or in that cycle, in that wheel. The wheels, or rather the souls in the wheel, are the ones that perpetuate cyclically, endlessly. So the beings that abide in heaven and heaven and hell do not stay there forever. And that is solely because their minds are still trapped within the condition of existence, which is causal. So this raises a concern with the concept of heaven. Heaven is generally viewed as a version of life that is free of problems. But for Buddhism, it's an existence that endures for an extremely long time, tens of thousands to millions of years, just for one being. But, however, doesn't see it as a solution, because it eventually ends and leads back down to lower states if one does not progress or evolve in that time, or get out of that perpetual existence. So this is why it holds the perspective of being between the extremes of eternalism, which believes in eternal heaven or hell, and annihilationism, the belief that absolutely nothing happens after death and everything finishes. Buddhism doesn't subscribe to the idea of being annihilated upon death, nor does it endorse the notion that just being good or following a specific faith or believing in anything will lead to eternal bliss in heaven. Both of these concepts are rejected. Buddhism offers a very realistic and logical perspective that acknowledges that all situations, good or bad, are temporary and will eventually change into something else. So the ongoing impermanence of states is the fundamental problem with life. Now, the second truth is the cause of suffering, which is generally said to be craving, or taught as the three poisons within the wheel of samsara, the bhava chakra. So these poisons are ignorance, craving, and aversion. Craving is usually just a form of attachment. But this applies to aversion, the things we don't want. Aversion, what we don't want, is the attachment to what we don't want, to that condition of not having something. We strongly don't want to lose our job. We strongly don't want this, we don't want that. So these polarities of mental states, craving and avoiding, these are magnetized states that we allow ourselves to feel because of ignorance. This is what Buddhism believes keeps us trapped in perpetual existence. And this perpetual existence is part of the process of transmigration, the death and rebirth of souls, and the evolution of them as they progress, with beings beginning their evolution, coming into the sphere of existence as innocent souls, beginning in the mineral and plant kingdoms, in the subtle dimensions, not physical yet, simple beings, struggling, involuting gradually, evolving and involuting, and struggling through the animal kingdom, becoming more complex and sophisticated, finally reaching the human kingdom, which for us, this particular species, is still the animal kingdom. And then working through that level, when we improve, we enter into the heavenly kingdom, slowly pass through it, and if we don't succeed in exiting that wheel of samsara, gradually descending back down again, devolving back into the third dimension, into the physical world as a human, and then even further down, animal states, the animal kingdom, and further still finally reaching the entrails of the earth again and into the non-physical subtle dimensions, the subterranean inferior worlds, and slowly passing through the purification of hell over the course of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, eternities, before revolving back again into a new round of evolution. So that is the cycle of life. We continually pass through these realms, these 6 realms of existence, all because of a lack of understanding of this fundamental dilemma that beings face. It's a dilemma that's caused by existence itself, because it's causal. We live in a causal existence. So clearly this is not something that one can escape from just by finding a better, fancier existence somewhere in heaven. The idea of transferring human consciousness, for example, going to the, first off, expanding to the moon, or living on Mars, eventually becoming interplanetary, and then finally transferring human consciousness into a computer or some kind of physical or digital, even software vehicle to escape illness and death, still carries the same inherent problem of perpetual continuation of existence. And there's, of course, no consideration of cause and effect or karma in this. But karma is fundamental. It's the only one of the few eternal laws, right? Karma, existence, and non-existence. The only way to make it work is if you were to somehow ensure that the system could run without hardware and with an operating system that is somehow immune to the inevitable deterioration that entropy produces over time. But I don't think there could ever be such a thing, because entropy is just one of the most fundamental laws of physics. There has to be some kind of superior governance or superior order that's managing this software and keeping it maintained or improving it somehow. And again, it's probably still going to require our own effort, our own individual effort to improve. Otherwise, that software will deteriorate over time. So in essence, the ignorance lies in not recognizing the fact that there is absolutely no escape from the predicaments of cyclic existence. This awareness is at the heart of the Four Noble Truths. The third noble truth states that there is a means to the end of suffering. Sometimes we call this the truth of cessation. And the Sanskrit term for this cessation is nirvana. In the Theravada tradition, we say nibbana. It's another synonym. So that's the Pali term. Although nibbana refers to the cessation of suffering, it's really just the starting point of liberation. Since as a psychological state and as a dimensional plane, it too is still within the sphere of existence. So therefore the beings there are subject to change and entropy and the law of evolution or involution. But this is where we start in our pursuit of happiness. And from nirvana onward, there is the possibility of walking completely off of the wheel of existence, the wheel of suffering for good. Also, this initial step toward liberation is something that we can realize during life. We can practice it in the physical world. It's the human life that allows us to practice because we have the human intellect, which gives us free will. It's not something that we have to do or have to wait for until death. To become a resident of Nibbana, it's just a matter of your psychology. It's how your mind is vibrating in this moment even. It doesn't have to be in the future. Everything is done in the present, right? It requires that the mind becomes purified to a high enough degree that it simply belongs to that level. It just vibrates at that level with less conditions. And many people in history have attained these heavenly forms of liberation. And there are levels of liberation, levels of enlightenment that's very specific. The Buddha, of course, accomplished this. His enlightenment was attained in one life. They say it was attained almost instantaneously. I think there's some truth to that, because he was probably working on himself. He was working on himself for a while, and then there must have been some final comprehension, and then that was just enough to finalize his awakening as a bodhisattva. But those who don't attain enlightenment during life don't generally know what to expect after death. It's better to attain some level of liberation when you're alive. This is a major distinction from Christianity, because the concept of heaven is an everlasting condition of ease that only occurs after death for Christians. But the Buddha doesn't make such claims, that such infinite realms exist, or infinite existences are there for us, especially those that are only redeemable after physical death. No, the work must happen. It can happen anytime. It depends on your mental state, because we live in not only, as I said, a causal universe, but a universe of vibration. Everything is made up of some kind of frequency. Everything has a frequential tone. So the tones must match. To live in a certain place, you have to be a vibrational match. So the right understanding about liberation is that unsatisfactoriness and suffering can and should be eliminated during life. This is carried out through rigorous psychological work. Now, as for the experience of eternal liberation from suffering, this eternal liberation from suffering by means of escaping existence, many people have asked what happens thereafter. And the Buddha clarifies that there is no continued existence upon reaching this level of enlightenment. There are also many practitioners of jhana meditation who have they have some experience right now in escaping the realms of existence. They do so temporarily. Their consciousness is freed when they are in that state. They've explained that when a person's consciousness passes through and beyond all the levels of heaven, some of which are known as the jhanas, and then furthermore the formless attainments, they reach the dimension of non-existence, which at the highest point is called neither perception nor non-perception, abbreviated as NPNNP. Now, in this state of consciousness, only formations, or proto-thoughts, as Nelson Armstrong calls them, exist and arise here and there. It's a very abstract place. It's extremely hard to describe. The only thing that remains are the pre-manifestations of thoughts before their final formation. You could say primordial thoughts. The only perception is of disconnected images and colors and patterns that are not recognizable. This is one of the most primordial states of consciousness that one can abide in. So anyway, the Four Noble Truths states that the method to end suffering is the Eightfold Path or Middle Path. The true meaning and intention of the Four Noble Truths and other scriptures, as Buddhism spread throughout the West, has not surprisingly been diluted and personally tailored as the knowledge was passed on to modern philosophers and writers who made their own interpretations of the suttas. So in modern times, and particularly in North America, Buddhism is most commonly practiced in a very incomplete and non-religious way, for many people here, Buddhism is treated as just a supplement, a supplemental philosophy that we just incorporate into our modern secular lives because it just makes us feel better, basically. Just something to help us get by easier with our tendency to get distracted frequently, and something to help us with our everyday anxiety and worries. Just a guide of ethics and good habits that promotes just an overall quality of life. We have these very personal and unique applications of Buddhist philosophy because the majority of people here are either brought up as non-religious and scientifically secular or Christian. So this way of practicing Buddhism fits into our lives very nice and well, but ultimately it has no effect on the problem of continual suffering. So many modern writers who've written Buddhist scriptures in English for us to use have severely altered the original texts to suit our needs as secularists. And it tends to be that the most crucial and fundamental concepts like rebirth and karma and interdependence, heaven and hell, have been tailored for us with vague, speculative, and metaphoric interpretations that really just tiptoe around what is otherwise a difficult truth to swallow, but a necessary one. These ideas are not congruent with the intentions of traditional Buddhism. This is mostly how it is with Buddhism in the West. Most Buddhists are not monastics. Our society has become so removed from religion and so attached to sensual life that whenever we come across something we don't like in philosophy, we just make up the most ridiculous, stubborn excuses to discredit it and continue on with the things that we like and prefer, that sound nice to the theories or philosophies that sound nice to us, that are convenient for us, and something that doesn't make us afraid. We say things like rebirth and hell are just metaphors for certain conditions we find ourselves in, or that heaven and hell are we're experiencing right now. It's the physical world. That's all that exists. It's mental. Or we say that this or that line in the Bible must have been sneaked in at some point by power-hungry priests. And I didn't make that one up. I've heard someone say that before, all because he just didn't want to admit what the Bible was stating about the broad and narrow paths or roads, which is Matthew 7, line 13 and 14. Or we say the Gnostic speaker's teaching is fear-based, even though the organization is non-profit and the teachers are anonymous. So what are they getting out of it? So for this reason, there are numerous movements in Buddhism that are mostly North American creations. These are very new, modern movements, mostly coming from North America, created by many people who, frankly, don't want to grow up and face the reality of traditional Buddhism. So we have agnostic Buddhism now, and atheistic Buddhism, secular Buddhism, and so on. These movements are flatly in denial of the historical sutta orientation because they attempt to ignore, disregard, and or replace what the suttas say about reincarnation and rebirth and the perpetual suffering of existence. And of course, it's understandable that writers want to create slightly modified versions of Buddhist scriptures that may be better accepted by Westerners. But there comes a point where the modifications and interpretations really defeat their original purpose. And as for the suttas themselves, they become disgraced by these alterations. They become perverted. In the original suttas, you will find the phenomenon of endless birth and death mentioned hundreds of times in different places. The attitude of the suttas is very severe, and nearly everything is intended to be taken literally. They clearly state that there is no way to get around constant rebirth if one does not follow the complete Dharma. To be in denial of this, I would say, is somewhat pathetic and immature, because here we have a crucial responsibility regarding the evolution of our soul. And just because we want to enjoy our life, or just because we fear things like hell and we can't admit it, we can't own up to this responsibility of the Dharma and make those lifestyle adjustments that are required. We'd rather pretend that it's all symbolic. But these essential principles are explicit in the suttas. Now, whether or not the suttas are true, the point here is that anyone who denies that these concepts are part of the original teachings of the Buddha, they have a very strong intention to alter the truth. These days, the sutras are available in English, so anyone can read them. And when you pick some of these up, you can see the very distinct modifications and interpretations made by the writers and philosophers with materialistic and annihilationist perspectives. Many Christians identify as Buddhist Christian, or they simply come across Buddhism and they want to somehow reconcile it with Christianity. But due to a lack of investigation, many of them think that Buddhism provides an eternal heaven. So these are the two extreme beliefs that have always been around. The middle path claims that the condition of life is very much in between these two views. So the meaning of the Eightfold Path is quite straightforward. If you look at it in the context of a spiritual path that you take, it's only when you learn about how the middle path is supposed to be applied to your attitude and psychology that things become more subtle. Ongoing cyclic existence through the 6 realms of life is repeated hundreds and even 1,000 or a couple thousand times throughout the enormous collection of the Buddhist scriptures from the Pali Canon.